Hi, it's story time again. Are you ready for another tale? Wonderful. Well, if you settle down, close your eyes and listen, and I will read for you The Study of Magic Under Difficulties. In the island of Sicily, and in the fair and famous city of Messina, dwelt a man, Lycantius by name, who was a great proficient in 2 different arts. By day, and ostensibly to his fellow citizens, he carried on the trade of a tailor, but by night, and secretly, he studied the art of necromancy. One evening, when he had locked himself in his room, and was occupied with all kinds of magic works, as ill luck would have it, a young man, one of his apprentices, came to the door. Dionysius, such as was his name, had returned to fetch from the chamber of Lycantius something which he had forgotten. When he perceived that the door was closed, but at the same time heard a noise within, he crept gently up, peeped through the keyhole, and witnessed his master's magic doings. Such delight did this give the young man, that from that moment he thought of nothing but how he might secretly learn his master's art. Needle, thimble, and shears thenceforth were little troubled by him. He cared alone to learn that which no one cared to teach him, and so, from having been an industrious, attentive, useful workman, he became careless, idle, and inattentive. Lycantius, perceiving this change in his apprentice, discharged him from his service, and sent him back to his father, who was much grieved in consequence. The father, having repeatedly lectured his son, with tears besought him to attend to his duty, and taking him back to the tailor, earnestly begged him to receive his son once again, desiring him, should he again neglect his business, to punish him severely. Lycantius, out of kindness to the poor old man, was soon persuaded. He again received his pupil, and instructed him carefully every day in cutting out and sewing. However, Dionysius would absolutely learn nothing. His master gave him many a sound caning, so that the poor apprentice, who received more blows than bread, was always black and blue, all of which he bore with the greatest patience. So insensible had he become to everything through the engrossing desire to learn that secret art which he night after night watched his master carry on as he stood peeping through the keyhole. Lycantius, who took him for the stupid lout he appeared to be, at last gave himself no further trouble to conceal his witchcraft from him, thinking that he could not even learn the business of tailoring, which was so easy. He would far less comprehend witchcraft, which is really a puzzling art. He therefore no longer made a secret of his practices to Dionysius, who now thought himself the most fortunate of men, and who, although others considered him such a blockhead, in a very short time became such a proficient in the magic art that he understood more of it than his master. One day, as the father was passing by Lycantius' house, not seeing his son in the shop, he entered and found that instead of working with the other apprentices, he was cleaning the house, and in short, performing all the offices of a housemaid. This so disturbed the good man that he took his son home with him, and thus lectured him. Thou knowest, Dionysius, how much I have expended on thee, in hope that thou wouldst learn a useful business, whereby one day to support thyself and me. But alas, I have sown my seed on the waters, for thou refusest to learn anything. Truly this will be my death, for I am so poor I know not how to support myself, nor have I any means of providing for thee. Therefore I beseech thee, my son, to learn to support thyself in any respectable way thou canst. Having said this, the old man began to weep, when Dionysius, moved by his distress, replied, Dear father, I thank you 1,000 times, and from my heart, for all the trouble and anxiety you have had on my account. But I beg you will not think, because I did not learn tailoring as you wished me, that I have therefore passed the time in idleness. On the contrary, by night watching and unwearied efforts, I have learned an art which I hope hereafter to exercise so officiously that you and I shall live our days in peace and joy. That you may not imagine that I say this merely to satisfy you for the moment, I will at once give you a proof of what I affirm. Tomorrow, by means of my secret art, I will transform myself into a fine horse, saddle and bridle me, and lead me to the market. Sell me, and when you shall have made your bargain, go quietly home, your pocket full of money, and you shall find me here again, in the same form which I now bear. Judge therefore whether or not I have learned something useful, since in so short a time I can earn for you the necessaries of life. Take especial heed, however, when you sell me, not to part with my bridle. This, come what will, you must carefully retain, else I shall not be able to return, and perhaps you may never see me again. The next morning Dionysius stripped himself in presence of his father, and after anointing himself with a certain ointment, he murmured some words, whereupon, to the inexpressible astonishment of the good old man, in the place of his son, a fine, powerful horse suddenly appeared, which he immediately harnessed as his son had instructed him, and led him to the market. As soon as the merchants and horse dealers saw him, they gathered around him quite delighted with the beauty of the horse, the action of whose limbs and whole body was so perfect, and who showed such a fleetness and fire that it was quite surprising. All inquired if the horse were for sale, to which the old man replied in the affirmative. By accident Lecantius was in the market, and as soon as he saw the horse, and had narrowly examined him, he at once discovered that it was a magic horse. He therefore withdrew unperceived from the crowd and hastened home, disguised himself as a merchant, and provided with an ample sum of money, returned to the market, where he found the man still with his horse. He approached the animal, and after attentively observing him, recognized him as his apprentice Dionysius. He then asked the old man if he would sell him, and they soon concluded a bargain. Lecantius paid him 200 gold pieces, but as soon as he took him by the bridle to lead him away, the old man objected, saying that he had sold the horse but not the bridle, which he must have back. Lecantius, however, contrived to talk him over, so that he obtained the bridle as well as the horse, which he led home, and fastening him to the stall, gave him for breakfast and supper so many 100 blows that the poor beast became nothing but skin and bones, and excited the compassion of all who beheld him. Lecantius had 2 daughters, who, when they saw their father's barbarity, went daily to the stable to do what they could for the poor horse. They caressed him, patted him, and treated him with all possible kindness, and one day went so far as to lead him by the halter to drink at the stream. The moment, however, the horse found himself by the water, he threw himself into it and transformed himself into a little fish. He disappeared in the waves. At this extraordinary occurrence, the maidens stood speechless with astonishment, and returning home gave way to the deepest sorrow. Some time after, Lecantius returned, and went into the stable to administer a little further chastisement to his horse, when to his great astonishment he found him gone. Very indignant thereat, he went to his daughters, and beheld them in tears. Without inquiring the cause, for he knew full well the cause of their trouble, he said to them, "My children, fear nothing, only tell me what has become of the horse, in order that I may at once take measures concerning him." The poor maidens composed themselves on hearing these words, and related to him what had happened. When the father had heard the story, he hastened to the river, transformed himself into a large fish, and dashed into the water as fast as his fins would carry him, and pursued the little fish, intending to swallow him. When the latter beheld the ferocious fish with its terrible teeth, he was dreadfully alarmed at the thought of being swallowed by him, and approaching the bank of the river, he left the water, and in the form of a beautiful ruby set in gold, he threw himself unseen into the little basket which the king's daughter, who happened just then to be amusing himself with picking up pebbles on the sand, carried in her arm. As soon as the princess, who was called Violante, reached home, she took her treasures out of her little basket, and perceived the ring shining amongst the pebbles. As soon as the princess, who was called Violante, reached home, she took her treasures out of the little basket, and perceived the ring shining amongst the pebbles. Quite delighted, she placed it on her finger, and could not desist from contemplating it. At night, when the princess had retired to her sleeping apartment, the ring suddenly changed into a handsome young man. He laid his hand on the princess's mouth, who was about to scream aloud, then threw himself at her feet and besought her forgiveness. He assured her he was not there with any disrespectful purpose, but only to implore her assistance, and then he told her his misfortune and the persecutions he had to endure. Violante, somewhat reassured by the bright light of the lamp which burned in her chamber, as also by the words of the young man, whom she found very handsome and attractive, felt compassion for him, and said, "Young man, thou art very bold in entering a place where thy presence was not desired, but in consideration of thy misfortune I will forgive thee. Thy narration has awakened all my compassion, and I will show thee that I am not made of marble. nor have a heart of adamant. I am even resolved, so far as my honour will permit, to give thee my entire protection." The young man humbly returned thanks, and when day dawned, again transformed himself into the ring which the princess placed among her most costly jewels. It happened just about that time that the king fell dangerously ill, and all his physicians declared his disease was incurable. This came to the ears of Lecantius, who thereupon disguised himself as a physician and went to the royal palace, and being instructed to the king, inquired carefully respecting his symptoms, felt his pulse, examined his countenance, and said, "Your Majesty's disease is no doubt an obstinate one, and very dangerous, but take courage. In a short time I will restore you to health, for I possess a remedy by which I can, in a few days, cure the severest and most dangerous illness that exists." "Master physician," replied the king, "if you restore me to health, I promise to reward you so richly that you shall be content for the rest of your life." "My sovereign," rejoined the physician, "I desire neither rank, honours, nor riches, but request only that your Majesty will grant me one favour." The king readily promised this on condition that he should require nothing that was impossible. "I ask nothing more of your Majesty than a ruby set in gold, which is now in the possession of the princess your daughter." When the king heard this modest request, he sent for his daughter, and in the presence of the physician, desired her to fetch her whole stock of jewels. The princess obeyed, leaving out, however, the precious ring. But when the physician had thoroughly examined them, he said the ruby he wished for was not amongst them. Violante, who valued her ruby above all the rest, affirmed that she had no other jewels than those now before them. Whereupon the king said to the physician, "Retire now and return tomorrow. I will undertake that my daughter shall give me the ring." When the physician was gone, the king called Violante, and inquired in the gentlest manner where was the beautiful ruby which the physician wished for, saying that if she would give it to him, she should have in its place a still more beautiful and precious one. But she positively denied having it in her possession. She no sooner returned to her apartment than she locked herself in, and began to weep bitterly at the thought of losing her poor ruby, which she bathed with her tears and kissed with the utmost tenderness. When the ruby felt the hot tears that fell from the princess's eyes and heard her deep sighs, it assumed the human form and said to her, "Princess, on whom my life hangs, I beseech you, do not thus immoderately grieve at my misfortune. Let us rather devise some means of rescue, for that physician who so zealously covets the possession of me is no other than my greatest foe Lecantius, who desires to kill me. Therefore I implore you, do not give me into his hand, but feign to be indignant, and dash me against the wall. Leave the rest to my care." The following morning the physician again visited the king, who informed him that his daughter still persisted that she does not possess the ring. Lecantius, much displeased on hearing this, however, positively asserted the ruby was in the princess's collection. Thereupon the king again sent for the princess, and, in the physician's presence, said to her, "Violante, thou knowest that I owe the restoration of my health to this man's skill and care. he requires no other recompense of me than that ring which he declares to be in thy possession, and which thou dost assert thou hast not. I should have thought that thy love for me would have led thee not to give thy ruby alone, but thy life. I beseech thee, by the obedience thou owest to me, by the affection I have borne thee, to withhold it from me no longer." And the princess, on hearing her father's will so decidedly expressed, returned to her room, collected all her jewels, amongst which she laid the ruby, and taking them one by one in her hand in the presence of her father, showed them each in succession to the physician, who the moment he saw the ruby would have laid his hand on it, saying, "Princess, this is the ring I wish for, and which the king has promised me." But the princess, repelling him, said, "Stay, master, you shall have it," and holding the ring in her hand, exclaimed, "Then it is this precious jewel, so infinitely dear to me, that you covet. I must renounce this, for the loss of which I shall be inconsolable for life. But I do not yield it willingly, but only because the king, my father, requires it of me." And with these words she flung the ruby against the wall. As it fell to the ground, it instantly changed into a beautiful pomegranate, which burst as it fell, and its seeds were scattered all over the room. The physician as quickly became a cock, in order to swallow up all the seeds, and to thus destroy the unlucky Dionysius. But he had miscalculated. One of the seeds had so concealed itself that the cock could not discover it. The seed watched its opportunity, transforming itself into a fox, who, throwing himself on Master Cock, seized him by the throat and strangled and devoured him in the presence of the astonished monarch and his daughter Violante. Dionysius then returned to his human form and related all to the king, who thought he could do no better than immediately give him his daughter in marriage. They lived long together in peace and happiness, and the good old father of Dionysius became, instead of an indignant man, a rich and powerful one, whilst, on the other hand, the cruelty of Lycantheus cost him his life. Peaceful slumbers. Sleep sweet.